This is a response to Conferencereport and his video Teabagging Henry V. Um, Firstly, there's one little historical bugbear about Agincourt. That was the French threatening to take off English fingers. Uh, the French used crossbows predominantly because they're better against plate armour, and you don't need those to draw a crossbow or to, and that's my mobile phone setting my speaker off, so I'll just turn that off, which is inconvenient because I've just got my thing on my speaker. Anyway, a longbow needs those fingers. A crossbow doesn't. You can actually draw it. It holds in place by a mechanism, and then you can fire the bolt off. But the Battle of Agincourt, yeah, I mean, that's one of the big sort of like moments that we define ourselves as a nation, and it's a bit of a con because it's the same invading force that were the Normans that had provided that aristocracy and that upper class to the battlefield. They were, in a sense, Henry V wasn't going over to France because he just felt like it. He was actually going over to France because he thought he had a legitimate claim to the French throne because he thought he was French as well as English. And that goes back to the Battle of Hastings and the Norman yoke, and that again has a feedback effect in a historical sense, a kind of deep history sense, into the dislike for Europe because, of course, Europeans were the one French who are embodied in the French, came over here, stole our cheese, and stopped our language being spoken in court, and all those different things. And that does feed into it. But I think another essential difference between the British UKIP movement and the teabagging movement has to be the ideas around human rights and the legal framework that are set up that guarantee you rights. In the States, it's something called the Constitution, and I listen to a few right-wing outlets out there and YouTubers, just because I think if you're going to keep an open mind, you should listen to all parts of the argument. And their argument would run like this: if it isn't in the Constitution, then it shouldn't be part of federal law. It should not be imposed by the federal state upon the rest of the country. You should only be able to put something in the federal law if it is covered by the Constitution. And that's really what I understand about that part of the movement. And so their Human Rights Act, as it were, the Constitution, is sacrosanct in that sense. It can't be attacked, it can't be had a go at. Over here, because we do not have a written constitution, we have we have a constitution through monarchy. We have a constitution that's guaranteed by a person, not by a piece of paper. We don't have the same reverence for a written set of rights. Now, you can see this in your papers, in newspapers, that you can see that these people, one of the things they attack is the Human Rights Act that has been enacted in British law for several years now, and that's a symbol of Europeans trying to enforce their will, because we don't need the Human Rights Act. The ideas of British freedom are there in the air we breathe, and it's taken in with mother's milk. And that idea actually is an old one, and it's quite a good one when it's used when we haven't got a written constitution. There's a film called A Matter of Life and Death which has this superb moment where it talks about how English freedoms are taken in because someone turns around and says, you haven't got a constitution. And that whole idea that it's in the air what we breathe goes back to, there's arguments of slavery. It runs through that when people are arguing that you should be able to have slaves, that when you bring slaves over from Jamaica and from the Caribbean, and they come to England, they should remain slaves. And then what people do is they use Magna Carta. Interesting, nothing's used, but they the arguments around it, the counter arguments are based on this kind of idea. No, they're in England. Free people live in England. So you bring someone over here, they become free, and that becomes part of the abolitionist movement within the UK. So yeah, there's that kind of mistrust of foreign imposed rules, ironically, because of course the Human Rights Act comes off the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe, you should look at the founding members. This is not the EU, this is not the EEC as was. This is a Council of Europe that still exists, and I really recommend you look at who were founding members, because this isolationist little let's stay out of Europe state actually is a founding member in 1949 of the Council of Europe, along with the Low Countries, the Benelux countries, France, Italy, you know. And the Human Rights Act was initially written in its earliest form by groups of English solicitors, British solicitors, in conjunction with their French and Italian and Low Countries, Benelux countries, friends. You know, it is a council that stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific, because Russia is a member of the Council of Europe. It includes Greenland. It has observer members are countries like United States, Canada, Japan. So it's a much more wider reach, and that's where the Human Rights Act comes from. So the Human Rights Act is actually built by a group that includes us at the beginning. This isn't an add-on. We didn't join later and find it like this when we came along with founder members of this. It's based on English law. It's based on what English people would expect as rights. And part of the whole thing of UKIP, and part of the whole thing is yes, it's a rich man's club. It's a rich man's club relying on nationalism to give them foot soldiers. But it's also something that detests the fact that we have to have human rights. It detests something that we created. And we should be proud of, and we should be reminding people that, you know, this was something that we wrote. Thanks for listening. That's what I want to say. Okay, bye bye.